another episode of our new video series. Today we're discussing women's sport at the university and beyond. Women's sport is entering headlines more and more at the moment, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for not so good reasons. Social media in particularly has raised concerns around attitudes towards women in sport, with various campaigns being launched in the past couple of years. So with that all being said, we're joined by club captains from 4 women's clubs here at Exeter. So can you each introduce who you are, your club, and for me, I'm most interested in what drew you to your sport in the first place?
So I'm Georgia Ralph from women's cricket, and I got into it just purely through my family playing. My dad was really heavily involved with my club at home. My brother played and I wanted to beat him basically.
So I'm Faye and I play rugby. So I started playing rugby, just someone suggested it and I thought it sounded like fun. So I just emailed my local club and it just so happened they were starting a girls team. So that's how I got into it.
I am Ailish, most people know me as Scotty, but I have been playing basketball for 8 or so years. I got into it through school because I originally played netball, and then from there I just went through like the pathway of basketball in England.
I'm Georgia. I'm from women's football. I started playing football, I think I was about 5. And actually I've got a twin sister, so I feel like maybe that was how we got into it. We just went and started at it was an all boys club actually. We were 2 of maybe 3 girls there, but that's how we got into it, and then just from there got through grassroots and have continued up until now.
So I suppose the first topic to really look at then, obviously now you've all introduced yourselves, is sort of the benefits of getting women and girls into new sports, and especially at university, obviously at university age or from a young age. I suppose the first question to yourselves then is, how challenging is it or isn't it in trying to recruit women into your sports in that university setting?
I don't mind going. So I think the issue that we have is mainly due to basketball is not a big sport in England at all. It never has been. So compared to rugby or football, one of our biggest issues is participation, because the go-to sport for girls in this country would be netball rather than basketball. So membership-wise, that's our biggest issue. But at the same time, we have found once members join, they usually stick with us for the whole 3 years that they're at university, which is quite nice actually. So it shows that we've got something to offer, I guess.
Yeah. So we don't have that problem of it not being a big sport, but I think a lot of people have this already an idea about women who play rugby as maybe not being so feminine. So I think that puts a lot of people off. And then so I think and there's less exposure of women's rugby, so I guess people just don't really see it as an option. And I don't know about you lot, but I didn't ever play it at school, so people don't have that idea that they like it already. So you have to kind of convince people that they will like it before you even get started.
Yeah, I think that's quite similar with us as well. It's about, not a lot of people play cricket at school, but they tend to play rounders. So we sort of try and use that to draw people in a lot of the time. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we've got the people that have played since they were little. So we really have a mixture of people who've never even picked a cricket bat up before, or the people that have played to quite a reasonable level.
Yeah, and I think we benefit actually from being it's not quite mainstream, but women's football is a lot more popular. And it's a sport that everyone kind of knows the rules to already, which with cricket, there's a lot more complexity rather than just football a lot of the time. But I think one of the things about what the most common thing I've found this year when people are signing up or wanting to sign up is they always say to you, it's I want to play, but I don't think I'm very good. So that completely kind of puts them off. So I think confidence is a big thing that sometimes is a barrier for people to join, firstly, just sport in general, but also new sports. But agree with you, I think actually we've certainly benefited from the growth of women's football and just more coverage and all that kind of stuff. But hopefully I think that will happen for other sports too, but we're probably a little bit different in that sense, but still quite similar.
That's right. I was going to say, in terms of that coverage then, like you were saying, do you think the AU do enough for all of your clubs to sort of help publicise, or do you think they could help out a little bit more?
I mean, I think maybe this year is not the easiest thing to go off, as there hasn't been really anything to cover. But I think it's very different. So when I first started in my first year, the woman that woman that was the AU president at the time, Amy Clegg, she was club captain of women's football the year before I got here. So I think whenever you kind of have that relationship with someone, say, who's AU president, you do get a little bit more coverage, rightly or wrongly, just because I think sometimes we'd be on like the student sport Instagram or something like that kind of thing. But I think in general, it really depends. I think sometimes the high level sports might get a bit more coverage. And obviously when you get sports that have big club members, they might get a little bit more coverage if they have more like varsities or more events, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think we're definitely really lucky that because we're quite closely tied to the men's club, we get a lot of support from the AU and a lot of funding and everything. So I think we're quite lucky in that respect. So we do get from the AU, they are really helpful for us. So yeah, but the only downside is so when we have our varsity, obviously that's held at Sandy Park, so everyone has to get buses, but then almost all of the buses don't arrive in time for our kickoff because we have ours before the men. And then I think I've not heard this myself, but I have heard that there were some people, just not from the AU, but just in general, discouraging people from getting the earlier bus, so they didn't have to watch us, which is not what you want to be hearing. But yeah, generally we're quite lucky, but we do have the odd thing that.
Yeah, for us, because we're a small club, our funding is limited, so we don't get to put on these like big events like varsity. So from that perspective, the best way that AU can help us is financially, because for example, like kit and stuff, we don't have the finances in the club to pay for it for our members. So the AU does have a good few schemes, like they've got the gift of kit scheme, which we've definitely used in the past. So they do help in that sense. But the only way to get out of that loop would be to get more members and to like promote us, so then as a club we get more money and we can like continue growing, and that has been happening more over the last few years. But I definitely, and especially this year as well, I guess it is all online, so there's only so much you can do. But yeah, in that sense, the AU helps with what we need, but in long term, we just need to like develop, and I think we'll need help from the AU, but also that's on us to like create events and stuff that we can put on. So
yeah, I think we're quite an unusual sport within the university sort of season, because we're the only sport that actually takes part in the third term when all of exams are going on and everything, whereas you guys all compete sort of during term 1, term 2. So we get quite a lot of support and coverage from the AU because we're the only sport playing during that final period. So we kind of get all the focus a little bit, which is quite nice.
I think that with regards to what Faye said, I think it's quite interesting to ask you each whether or not you think that there's enough collaboration between the men and women's sides of the sport, whether there should be more or less, whether or not that's necessary, and whether you think that would help increase the exposure of the women's side.
Yeah, I know for us, throughout my time at the university, there has been, we've either worked really closely with the boys or we've really worked completely as two separate clubs. So we are two separate clubs on like the list of sports in the AU. But I know this year we've been working quite close, and last year we worked quite close with them, but that's just because the people on committee in the women's club are really good friends with the people on committee in the boys club. So that was something that was done like socially rather than a structure that we follow every year, because I know in my first year I never really met any of the boys, but since we have, I think since we got closer, I know our club numbers have expanded, so it does get exposure because men's basketball is quite popular, and so it just helps us like you were saying, when they promote an event, we're always linked to it, whether we're part of it or not. We're always linked to, oh, there's a basketball event going on. So in that sense, it does increase our exposure, which is really nice, especially on social media as well.
Yeah, no, I think what's quite different is that it's just whether it's necessary. That was part of the question. It's quite a hard thing because I think we're quite similar. It kind of varies year on year whether we kind of collaborate. This year we were supposed to be doing some more collaboration with Movember, but then lockdown happened, so we couldn't do like the mixed tournament that we planned and stuff. And this year the club captains and the guys from football have been really, really good, and they've really wanted to reach out, which has been really nice. But it's really hard because I think if you think about merging and stuff, I think sometimes what happens when you say if we did merge and we became EUAFC, which is something they thought about doing, I think maybe last year, you lose that kind of I think representation sometimes as women's sport, and you just get lost under the umbrella of football rather than women's football. And I'm a big kind of like advocate that women's football is quite different to men's football. Like I think the tactics are different, and I think not everyone appreciates that all the time, like, and that kind of thing. So I just think that sometimes, like Scotty said, you need the exposure from the men's club because they have a lot kind of wider reach. But I think sometimes what you don't want to do is lose that standing as your own club and your own kind of identity if you get kind of pulled into say men's football. But just something that we do, I think we have had that's really positive is men's futsal. And they themselves, they don't identify themselves, but they have their own like men's futsal club or something. And I think the women's futsal teams and the men's futsal teams have a really good relationship. They always would come and watch our games and we go and watch their games, that kind of thing. But I think it just depends. I think it's very kind of, it is helpful, but I think also it's important that you still get the right recognition as a women's club as well. And you don't want to get lost in that sometimes, which might happen.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because I feel, especially with the men's rugby club, because it's so big, I feel like if they were too close, then we definitely kind of probably get overlooked a bit more. But we're really lucky that we've got the coaching staff work with both men's and women's teams. And that means, and as well as so like before our big games, quite often a men's team will come and do team run against us. And obviously, men's and women's rugby is, again, like you were saying about football, is different, but they are just because the fact that they're men, they are like physically faster. So it's always much easier to push yourself. Like you have to push yourself a bit more. So that's always really helpful. To work with them on that. So yeah, that's good. That's always really good.
Yeah, you were talking about sorry, just quickly, you were talking about how you wouldn't want to merge as a club, and I completely agree with that. Like we're a small club, but we're quite proud, so we wouldn't want to. Like our clubs, the men and the women run separately. The only interaction we have is socially and through big events, like you were saying. But I think because we're a small club, we value different things to the men. So what you're saying about if we joined an even bigger club, we'd kind of lose that identity. We would lose that community feel that we have tried to develop it within our club. But yeah, no, I just thought that was such a good point. Thank you.
Yeah, what we've done this year is we've introduced the EUCC umbrella. But we're still maintaining our own identities as EULCC and EUMCC. So we still keep, like you're saying, we still keep that identity, but we do form under a bit of an umbrella in terms of the funding that we get. And this year we are looking to, we're still hopeful that we're going to have a book season, fingers crossed. But if we don't, we've already got plans in place with the boys to sort of get some fixtures on and things where we don't have to travel and play against other teams. So that's looking quite promising in sort of building the bridge between the two clubs. But again, still keeping our own identity to that.
I was just going to ask then on that as well. Obviously, all of you have been talking about having that umbrella, but working separately in terms of that promotion, if you like, then on social media and all that. Who do you think that boils down to at the end of the day? Does that need to come from your side on the women's section, or does that also have to come from the men's equivalents, if you like, so men's rugby, men's football, helping out a bit more as well?
I think it's quite valuable when you have the men's club promoting like women's like fixtures like our varsity and everything, because they ultimately at the moment they do have a bigger following. Like people do keep an eye out for them a lot more. So just having, and the like it's not necessarily validation, but the fact that people see that, oh, if they take them seriously, maybe we should be taking them seriously as well. So I feel like that is definitely definitely valuable. And like I think it does, obviously, if we do need to make sure that it works both ways. So like we promote them, they promote us. So I think that's something that could definitely be better, I think, for us at least.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I think that the men at the minute across, I think, all of our sports have the larger following, as you said, and I think we really need to sort of utilise that to help us as women's clubs to sort of gain that promotion, as it were, to sort of put our sports out there as women's sports as well.
Yeah, no, well, even I don't know about you guys, a lot of our coaches are student coaches, so they're not actually external, which sometimes just makes everything a bit easier. But actually what men's football have done really well is I kind of got in touch with them, I think it was in the summer, and I said, can you put an advert out for, we'd like some coaches to come across and help us, and they did that for us. And I think it's little things like that where you know that you can ask them to maybe help you and they do it, and it just kind of builds and builds, and then when you do maybe little things together, and then in the end it kind of adds up, and there's kind of just that more, I think, familiarity with it. So it's not just like a big deal of you asking them to help you out or come and do an event. I think that's what we probably all need, is a bit more of a kind of consistency. So it's not just like in 1 year we do it and then the next year it doesn't happen and then it happens again. And I think that's the problem. And I've seen that for the past years. It's quite up and down.
Yeah. And I think that's the point at which the AU has to keep some form of structure between the clubs. So like, as you're saying, on a personal level, it's so nice to be able to just like ask for the help of one of the men's clubs. And I think that does like help strengthen the bonds between the clubs, but then to make sure that it's done in like in a respectful way where both clubs get to keep their identity, where it's not a IOU, it's a genuine, I want this sport to develop at this university. I think that's when the AU steps in to help promote the sport in general. And although women are underrepresented compared to men in all of our respective sports, I feel like that's something that could be identified and implemented by the AU, because it's across sports that it's happening. It's not just one bad relation with the men's club in a single sport. And yeah, so I think that's the influence of the AU, that they should identify those patterns and then help out where they can.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, we hate to have to go to the negative sides that women's sport encounters, but at the same time it is really important to talk about, I suppose. So my next question for you guys is whether you as individuals or as your club as a whole have come up against any negative perceptions, stereotypes within the university, or maybe at a wider level as well, and what you think the impacts of those perceptions are.
So I don't know if you all saw a little while back the big stream of Exodusly or Xfest posts about women's rugby, which, like, even if it was meant as a joke, like, it just, I feel like the presence of that opinion, like, it comes up on people's timelines, and like you think, even if you just read it and think, oh, whatever, it's like running through the back of your head. So I feel like the more people see that, like, it's not positive at all. And like now, luckily that they're filtering them out, I think now. So we've not had any, but I think it just contributes to people having that negative perception of women's rugby. And I know, like, it is quite daunting for a lot of women to come and play rugby, because it seems like quite an aggressive sort of sport. But like, when you get into it, the range of body types and diversity of people we see coming through is amazing. And like, so there is a place for everyone, but I think if you don't see that, then you're just not going to think it's something you can do. So yeah, that's not fun.
I think as you say, you get all this negative exposure, But I think as a small club that's also not a very well-known sport, we've managed to avoid that scrutiny. We would love to be more present, obviously in a positive light, but the stereotypes, there isn't many that are very like present in going to join our club. So we're quite lucky in that sense. I don't think it's ever put anyone off joining. Anything thought about our club has put anyone off joining. But yeah, I would like to see what it's like in a few years when our club gets bigger. But I completely agree. I think the point you're saying about how even if it's not like a conscious thought, it is something that's present because it is on your phone when you look on Facebook or something. I think that's so relevant because as meaningless as throwaway a comment was, you can't predict how it's going to be received by everybody. So saying something negative for the sake of saying something negative is just doing nothing but hindering like the club. I completely understand how that could influence a person joining. Yeah.
We've been very lucky. We don't really. Can't think of any time where we've sort of had any negative sort of stereotypes about us as a club or even members within our club. I think we're quite fortunate for that. And again, sort of linking back to where the men come in with our club, they're also very supportive of us, and if we see them before a game day or at training, they're always saying have a good day or whatever. So no, we've never really had that, but again, that probably links in with being quite a small club still, and maybe if we have that growth, we might see more of that.
No, I think we're probably quite similar to rugby in that there's a kind of stereotype about being a female, a woman, in like a male-dominated sport. And I think a lot of that time that can deter people from joining. But I think sometimes what's interesting is, well, it's not interesting, but most of the time when you get negative kind of opinions and stuff, it's always from people that aren't within the sport and they don't understand. And it's always from that. But just an example of something that just kind of, it just shows it's still just such a problem, and it's just kind of sometimes really, I guess, almost subconscious when people do it. They don't realize they're doing it. But we had a game in September actually when we were lucky enough to play in the local leagues. I think it was the beginning of September, so it was really warm. And one of the opposition players had to go off because I don't know if she was just struggling with the heat or something like that. And then we had a pause in the game, and the ref came over and he said to us, "Yeah, so I think what I'm going to do is I'll shorten the game for you. So we'll knock 10 minutes off and make it 80 minutes rather than 90." And I mean, for me, it was the first game back of the season, so 10 minutes less is kind of good. But actually, when you're reflecting on it, it's like he wouldn't have said that if it was like a men's game, basically. And we were all a bit like, right, I don't know why I said that, but he obviously thought this girl's struggling with the heat. But I think what he didn't realise is when you say something like that, it's not just about making the game shorter or something. It's kind of, would you have said that if it was a men's team? You probably wouldn't. And so I think that's where it comes in, where if it's even coming from people that are within the sport and it's like a referee, it's just, there's a long way to go in terms of that. So that's just something that I think that, but just in general, I think we're quite lucky that it's a very supportive club, and regardless of whether it's like external stereotypes or assumptions and judgments, I think within the club there isn't that at all. So maybe it's a bit less prevalent because of that, but I think just still externally there's quite a few things that are still a problem.
And I suppose then that sort of raises the question of, in your opinions, what do you think is the best way to sort of try and break down those stereotypes? And again, is that something that has to be pushed and driven by yourselves as women in your particular sports, or is that something that obviously for us at the uni, something the university should be helping with as well?
I feel like no one person can take on the responsibility to equalise women in sport, because that's just a bridge you will never cross. But I do think that all of us have obviously chosen to be in a position where we have influence over women in sport at this university. In that sense, I think that's so good, because listening to what everyone's saying, we all have the same idea. We all want to like promote our sports, get more people involved, increase participation and stuff like that. And so I think that's where it would have to start, at least, within the individual clubs, like developing themselves, making themselves better, creating bonds with other, like this sport itself is creating bonds between women in sport at the university. I think that's so good. The AU can play a role, like I said earlier, in identifying this as a problem, looking at the negative perceptions and promoting it. So on a more official basis, there could be like schemes and stuff to come in. But I do think it starts from the people who are just passionate about developing it, which means putting yourself in a position that you have a platform to kind of speak about it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, I completely agree. I think it's a bit of both, really. It's kind of if you're in a position where you can have that impact on other people, you utilize it in the best way that you possibly can. And of course, you can't control other people's views and opinions. You're always going to get people that are not going to be supportive in whatever it is you're doing. But I think you're right. I think it starts from people that are in those positions and that they're passionate about it. And you just kind of give other people the confidence and the platform as well to do that alongside you as well.
Yeah, definitely. But I think the biggest change has to come with like more exposure from not just within our, like not just us, because obviously when we post, it'll probably, quite frankly, it'll probably be the people who already think that who are going to see it. But like when as a university as a whole, when they are positive about women's sport and everything, and even wider than that, just in the media, actually having sort of games from all of the sports televised, and so people can see it and see it as something that it is good quality. It is what everyone wants to be watching. Like that's, I think the biggest thing needs to come from that, because we can do our best, we're never going to have that massive impact that we need to be having. See what I mean?
Yeah, agreed. I think from the televised fixtures and games, that's where role models come in as well. And it's really important, particularly for the younger ages, but also just all women in sport and wider. I think it's really important to have role models, female role models within sport, and even for the young boys to look up to as well. It shouldn't just be male role models that people have to look up to. So yeah, agreed. I think it has to come from wider. But we definitely play a role in that, and we have to keep going in pushing our clubs and our teams to be the best they can be, so that if there is that one person watching who disagrees with women's sports and sees, a really good game, then that might change their opinion, hopefully.
Is just looking at that media coverage, again, looking at it from a Bucks perspective. Obviously, I know a couple of you are high performance, a couple of you aren't. Do Bucks do enough? Do you think they can do a little bit more? Like, obviously, Faye, I know they set the top tier competition for the women last year for Bucks, but didn't actually stream any of it. Well, obviously, they stream a match a week for the men. So to all four of you, do you think that's something that needs to be worked on a little bit as well? And do you think having those live feeds of games or highlights would help boost the profile a little bit more?
Yeah, I think definitely for us, we'd like to see Bucks do a little bit more. In previous years, the Bucks final is played at Lords, but the men get the main pitch and the girls get the little pitch on side. So it'd be quite good to see that, maybe have them on separate days so that you can actually get the girls on the main pitch at Lords as well, because I don't really see why it should be any different. I don't see why they should be sort of pushed in the corner on the back pitch. So yeah, we'd like to see a lot more from them, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Same as what you were saying about not streaming things, because I feel to have that sort of equality, I know we generally don't tend to play our games quite so late, so that may, I don't know, have an influencing factor, but just having, even if they did post highlights, sort of like the Premier 15s do every week, just of sort of the best bits of each game at the top, that would probably just give that a boost, so people are seeing it and seeing it all over the country from different people from different sports, just so like we are here. This is still happening.
For us, I think I can say that I've never seen Bucks do something for our club, which sounds really bad because it could be my lack of engagement with Bucks rather than Bucks' lack of engagement with our club. Not so sure about that, but I'm pretty sure we don't have any live events streamed or any of this. So all our engagement with Bucks is simply being part of its league. So we don't know much about any of the other Bucks teams in our league at all. The main support we've got is from our local league because we play in two leagues. We do the Bucks League and we've got our local league, which is just Exeter District. And they've been quite supportive because they keep promoting coaching courses and things for engaging and stuff. But we've never received, as far as I know, we've never received that kind of support from Bucks. So yes, to answer your question, it would be lovely if they could help us.
Yeah, no, I don't think I can give too much on this because I'm not too sure either. How much? I'm pretty sure they will have streamed. I think I've seen highlights from a men's game because one of our coaches I think played, so he had like some highlights. But I don't know whether that was Books that did it or the uni that did it. But yeah, I'm not too sure. But just in general, I think live streaming events and putting highlights at which Faye suggested is just a really great way just to be more visible. And just for more people to, even if it's like a 10-second clip and they might even click off it, but at least they've seen it and it's better than nothing at all. And then for the people that want to see it, having it there, I think there's only good things that can come from more exposure and more kind of just more focus on women's sport as well as men's sport as well.
It really all feeds in in a big circle, like George is saying. I think that, you know, the more exposure you have, the more young women or more women in general you have getting more interested in the game. They're starting to play earlier, so they're developing the skills earlier. I know that, you know, a lot of what we have at women's rugby, and I think Faye will echo this, is girls joining at university level, and I think part of that is to do with maybe a little bit of stereotyping, and maybe that's broken down a little bit more at university level. But I think it's also about access at grassroots level, that a lot of girls do want to get involved earlier and the provisions just aren't there for them. So I wonder if you guys think that even just at a local level or from a school age, if maybe promoting sport within the school setting as not having masculine sports and feminine sports, because I know the school I went to, right, when it was winter, girls went and played netball and hockey and the boys went and played football and rugby, and there wasn't any crossover. And to think about that, it's a bit mad. I don't quite understand at what point in the timeline of history everyone went, right, well, netball is a girl's thing and rugby is a boy's thing, and you shouldn't be able to try each one. So I think I'm wondering if you guys think that encouraging that crossover early on will have a knock-on effect to having more benefit at university level and even into elite level performance.
I like 100% agree with you. I think this whole concept of genderizing sports is very slowly starting to be seen as how ridiculous it is. What you were saying about girls playing netball and hockey and boys doing a completely different thing, like, until you said it, I was like, oh yeah, that's really stupid, because it is, like, it's not something you think about because it's such a normal thing to happen, but it is just such an obvious example of where boys are told to do masculine sports and XYZ, and girls are taught to do feminine non-contact sports, like all of this stuff. And I think it changes a bit at university, like you were saying, because university is such a fresh start. You can just literally be whoever you want to be, and there's so much opportunity to join so many clubs that already have these members and this following. But I wouldn't have started basketball. It was one, my PE teacher was like, the netball team, you just go to this basketball tournament because we just needed some people to play. And so I wouldn't have got that exposure at all if it wasn't for one teacher who decided that girls can play basketball in this school, and then allowed us to do so. And it's been such a big part of my life. So to think that there are so many like young girls out there that just haven't had the chance to even experience something like that, I think is such a big issue. But I completely agree that it's definitely like a grassroots problem as well as a like systemic big social problem.
Yeah, agreed. I don't know if you guys are similar, but we're starting to see year after year the members that join our club, there's more and more of them saying that they've played cricket at school, and they had, even if it was just one PE lesson, there's more girls every year saying that they had that opportunity. So it's starting to look like it's something that's starting to change a little bit, and they are getting more exposure to these sports that used to be called masculine sports. I don't know if that's similar for you guys, or
yeah, it's definitely getting better. Like, I know once I'd left my school, people who I knew from my rugby club, they were saying that they'd started playing rugby at school, which is great. But I don't know how it is in your sports, but the way when I started playing at my club, there was literally 5 of us in our age group, and we had to go and we had to travel and merge with other teams, which is obviously not ideal. And then, because how it's structured, you have 3 year groups playing together. So I had just turned 15, and I was playing with some 18-year-olds. And when you're playing a contact sport, that's quite daunting. So I can see people definitely being put off by that. So whereas the boys have separate year groups for every single age. So obviously there's less women in girls playing rugby, but I think that is a real problem, that it's easy to be put off if you're going to have to tackle someone twice your size. So
I was going to say, just my perspective on it as well, I was very fortunate when the primary school I went to, I suppose, obviously, well, not I, the girls that were at the primary school I was at were given all those opportunities. We did mixed tag rugby tournaments, mixed netball, mixed basketball. So I suppose I can say they were probably ahead of the game where I was at primary school. But again, like talking about role models and sort of the different age groups with rugby, obviously you had the Chiefs Harlequins game yesterday. The girl that's playing fly half for Quins, Ellie Green, was at the same grassroots club as I was at. And again, I think it does come down to that grassroots level, is they saw that she had some talent, she got some of her friends with her, and it's a guy called Robbie Broadhurst, who was like the club chairman, saw that they were keen and really put the effort in to try and drive that. And I think that's, from my perspective on the grassroots scene, what it comes down to is, obviously, if you see doesn't matter whether it's boys or girls at that age, you see there's a passionate group of youngsters that want to give it a go. It's about giving them every level of support they can. And obviously some of them aren't going to make it to the same pro level as people like Ellie, but even if it just ends up being you still play grassroots sport and you love it, that's the important thing, is giving those opportunities.
At my secondary school, for sure, we had one female teacher who was there for a year, and while she was there in year 8, she decided, right, I want to start a girls rugby club at the school, and I remember it was me and 5 of my friends, and we played for a year, and we didn't do any games or anything like that, but we did a lot of like technique, skills, that sort of thing, tackling each other, and after she left, it stopped, and that was it. I think we asked around a little bit about whether or not it was going to carry on, and the kind of answer that we got from the other PE teachers was, well, none of us have the time to put into that, because she was running it after school. She was doing it out of her own volition. It was her own prerogative. She wanted to do that. And I hate to say it, the male PE teachers that were left over went, well, does anyone want to give up their time to teach these 5 girls how to play rugby? So I think that, like Harry said, like, no matter how many people want to give it a go, just having the option there for those girls to engage in that sport is really important. So unless anyone has anything else to say, I was wondering if you guys, to end, doesn't matter if you don't, if you have any questions for each other.
Yeah, so I was going to say, as a club, we're quite international. So I'm one of literally like a handful of people from the UK that's a member of our club. And it shows because a lot of them have said that they've had a much more exposure to basketball in their schools than I ever would have in England. So I was wondering, for you guys, have you also noticed that people who come to play from like international students, have you noticed differences in like participation or how they talk about sport in their schools? Because obviously it's a completely different school system and stuff.
Yeah, no, we have women's football is really, really big in America. Like it's bigger than men's football in America. And we do sometimes get some students who either maybe played in the US or they're from the US and they come over. And one of the things that, I mean, it's quite funny, but one of the things that one of the girls said was that when she used to play, I think high school level, they'd have crowds of like hundreds of people would just come and watch this like high school game. And then when we go to Topsham, there's like the lino and two like, I don't know, boyfriends of some of the players like just watching, and like it's such a big difference. But it's I think part of it is due to the culture, and it's like if it's something that's really, really, you know, in America, women's football is really well funded. Like they have in general, I think college sport in America is insane when you go and see some of the facilities and stuff. But I think it definitely varies, and there are some people who play out. I think some people from like the Philippines, and then their experience is different as well, because they're probably like it's a massive thing. But like what Lee said, at school, I played football actually probably more at primary school than I did at secondary school, just because the PE teacher, she left, that ran the football team in secondary school, and then I played outside of school luckily, but in school I didn't play. So I think it is really, really different. And sometimes then they're just shocked when they come and see the kind of level and the exposure we get here. It's a lot less or maybe more, I don't know.
I think for us, we don't really have a lot of international students that come over and play cricket, just because there's only a limited amount of nations that actually really play cricket and get involved with it. But I did go on a study abroad last year and went over to Australia, where cricket is huge, absolutely massive. And whilst the university sport wasn't as big there just because of travel distances, within clubs, pretty much every girl played some sort of sport, whether that was cricket, whether that was AFL, which is kind of similar to rugby, whether it was football. Every girl had a sport to go and play after school, and I thought that was really good to see. And on all of the sort of billboards, on all of the cereal boxes, there was always women's athletes. So there was those role models from everywhere for those girls and those boys to see, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, we don't have any international people coming over to play either, but a lot of, because I think with rugby, just it's in general, it's not, as my experience from talking to people, it's not played in schools very much really anywhere, that I've not people that I've met and spoken to at least. So yeah, I think most people's experiences are quite similar to the sort of mine, with not much at school.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting actually. I've never even thought about the international students coming over and how different they find it or how similar they find it. That's so good. I was gonna ask before we stop, unless you have anything else you want to say, Harry, do you think that conversations like this, like between clubs, do you engage in a lot of conversations with other women's clubs, and do you think that these kind of discussions are useful for you guys?
Yeah, no, I think maybe this year we've probably been pushed into it a bit more because everything's online. So the way that we actually probably have a lot more time on our hands to do this kind of thing than if we all had like fixtures and stuff and we were busy. But I think it's really helpful because I think we say we have a different experience to men's football, which we do, and then we also have a different experience to women's cricket, women's basketball, women's rugby. And I think you get a much greater appreciation of just how, in general, within the AU, clubs operate differently. Like they probably have different aims. So I think this is right. Rugby and cricket, do you both have high performance? Like
yeah, we do.
Yeah. So and basketball doesn't. I don't think, does it? No, yeah, so football doesn't either, but even that in itself might be something that impacts participation and all that kind of stuff, especially if you're rugby and you're cricket and you're maybe that might be a reason someone comes to Exeter because they know that you've got that high performance programme. But I think it's really useful to just see from other perspectives and take into account how different clubs might be approaching things and how we can adapt how we operate as well. But I think it is really helpful.
No, I agree. That really surprises me. I'd just assumed that football you'd have had the high performance. So so that's really surprising because obviously you're a big sport. So I assumed that you would. But yeah, I think this is definitely helpful, and I feel like when we're allowed to see each other again, I feel like it'd be really helpful to sort of do more in-person collaboration because obviously we can do all this and this is great, but I feel like then we can make those connections in person and sort of try each other's sports, that sort of thing. I feel like that could be definitely in the future something we get involved with.
Definitely agree. I actually spoke to Georgia and women's football about organising an event for November, which unfortunately got cancelled because of lockdown, but that's something that we're still really keen to do in the future if we're ever allowed to do that again. So and I think we'd be really keen to do the same with women's rugby, women's basketball and other sports as well. So yeah, I think it would be really, really good.
Yeah, the main thing we all want to do is develop our clubs, and even like little things. So we've had quite a few like AU meetings and stuff, and people just talk about where their club's at and kind of stuff that they're trying to do to develop. And well, even this meeting, people will say things that I might not have thought about in that way, or talk about something that they've implemented in their club that's worked really well. And people will just say things, and I'm like, oh, that's like such a good idea. Like, I'm just gonna steal it. Like, but I think in general that just helps everyone because obviously if there's a collaboration between any sport, you're going to get the whole exposure from a completely different group of people that you might not have reached before. But yeah, I think it's so cool. I genuinely really value talking to different club captains about what they're doing in their club and how that could help us and how we could help them and stuff. I do find it such like a value.
I think that's been really useful. Thank you all so much for joining us. I think we'll leave it there. We'll be sure to put all your socials in the description so that if anyone wants to go and check out any of the sports that we were talking to today, then please do go over, and I'm sure they'll be happy to chat to you about everything when everything gets back up and running.
So, thank you very much to everybody for joining Elise and I today, and we hope obviously that this has kept you engaged and has given you a different perspective on sport overall and sporting opinions, if you like, at university. Hopefully we'll be able to keep these coming your way, and thank you to the 4 club captains that joined us today as well. So keep your eyes peeled, and we'll see you again soon for the next podcast.